Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. I'm so glad you've joined me because today we are diving straight into a massive knot of confusion surrounding hormone replacement therapies. If you've been looking into HRT lately, you've probably been bombarded by heavily marketed treatments promising a completely natural fix to your symptoms. It's a hugely popular topic right now, but man, there is a dangerous amount of misinformation floating around out there. We really need to ask, are compounded bioidentical hormones actually safe and regulated?
It seems like a pretty simple question, right? But the answer is where things get super complicated. We're kind of wired to assume that words like natural or tailored automatically mean safe. But in the medical world, those words can sometimes act as a bit of a smokescreen. Today, we're going to explore the core problem at the heart of this explainer, which is navigating the really murky waters of compounded bioidentical hormones.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting the terminology trap, the regulatory reality, the risks of compounded hormones, the case for compounding, and finally, the medical consensus on safety. Let's get right to it.
Starting off with Section 1, the terminology trap.
So, there are two main terms getting thrown around, and understanding the difference between them is absolutely crucial. On one side, we have body-identical hormones. These are precise, tightly regulated duplicates of human hormones developed by the pharmaceutical industry, and they're fully authorized by regulators. On the flip side, we have compounded bioidentical hormones. These are regulated, custom-made doses. In fact, medical professionals in the NHS actually started using the term body-identical specifically to distance the regulated, safe therapies from these non-standardized compounded bioidentical versions.
So what actually is compounding? Well, in a pharmaceutical context, it's the creation of customized medications by specialist pharmacies. This happens when a standard mass-produced licensed product just doesn't meet a specific patient's clinical needs. Think of standard licensed drugs like an exact, heavily tested recipe from a Michelin-star chef. Compounded drugs, on the other hand, are a custom mix where the exact ratios and interactions aren't officially verified. These bioidentical hormones are usually derived from plant sources, things like yams or soy, and then chemically synthesized to match human hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone.
But the real kicker here is this. Natural and tailored are advertising terms. They are absolutely not medical guarantees of safety. Sure, the molecules might perfectly mimic human hormones, but because these mixtures haven't gone through rigorous, standardized clinical trials like licensed medications have, these marketing buzzwords can create a really false sense of security.
Moving on to Section 2, the regulatory reality.
We've got to talk about a pretty massive regulatory loophole here. The General Pharmaceutical Council regulates the pharmacy facility itself. They make sure the physical premises meet recognized quality standards. But the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency in the UK, or the FDA in the US, the actual bodies responsible for verifying drug safety, efficacy, and rigorous clinical testing, they do not approve these compounded drugs. They simply do not evaluate the final mixed product for safety.
And just to hit the nail on the head, look at what the US Food and Drug Administration says. They explicitly state compounded drugs are not FDA approved. This means that FDA does not verify the safety, effectiveness, or quality of compounded drugs before they are marketed. Standard regulatory bodies literally cannot vouch for the purity or effectiveness of what is inside a compounded HRT preparation.
Which brings us to Section 3, risks of compounded hormones.
Because these therapies are unregulated, the inconsistencies in dosages can lead to a whole host of unpredictable side effects. On the milder end, the creams and gels can cause skin irritation, but irregular hormone levels, those can cause severe mood swings, headaches, fatigue, abnormal blood lipid changes, and weight gain. And how are they even figuring out these custom doses? Well, some clinics use highly questionable saliva and serum tests. These tests are super costly, they're unsubstantiated by rigorous research, and they are definitely not recommended by major menopause societies. But we're not just talking about minor annoyances like fatigue or skin irritation. We are talking about severe, life-altering risks. Inconsistencies in the quantities of estrogen in these compounded preparations can actually lead to an increased risk of venous thromboembolism, which means dangerous blood clots in your veins. It can also increase the risk of endometrial cancer. Plus, some of these compounded treatments throw in hormones like DHEA, which aren't even proven to be effective for women. On top of that, many women are prescribed compounded progesterone creams, which are poorly absorbed by the body and completely fail to provide the necessary protection for the lining of the womb. It's a huge gamble.
Now, contrast all of those risks with the real-world evidence we actually have. Massive studies involving tens of thousands of women have proven that regulated, body-identical hormones are incredibly safe. Unlike the older synthetic versions, combining regulated estrogen with micronized progesterone shows no increased risk of breast cancer or blood clots. But remember, that fantastic safety profile only applies to the rigorously tested, regulated drugs, not the custom compounded mixtures.
Let's flip the coin for Section 4, the case for compounding.
To be fair, there is a reason these exist. In the UK, bioidentical hormones are legally supplied under something called the Specials Framework, found in the Human Medicines Regulations 2012. It's a very specific pathway that allows doctors to prescribe unlicensed medicines, but only when 3 steps are met. First, a standard licensed medicine has to be deemed completely unsuitable for the patient. Second, a customized dose or formulation is uniquely required. And third, the unlicensed medicine is then prescribed by a doctor and mixed up by a specialist pharmacy. The big appeal here is the idea of highly personalized care. Proponents and the clinics that prescribe these argue that compounding allows the treatment to be perfectly tailored to you, utilizing doses and combinations that you just can't get in mass-produced, standardized HRT products. They state that when it's prescribed and carefully monitored by an experienced doctor, this individualized therapy can be safe and effective for people whose clinical needs just aren't being met by standard options.
All right, Section 5, Medical Consensus on Safety.
So, what do the major health bodies say about all this? The guidance is incredibly clear. NICE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, explicitly instructs healthcare providers in their menopause guideline to explain to women that the efficacy and safety of unregulated compounded bioidentical hormones are unknown. Because they haven't been through the clinical trial ringer, the scientific data just simply isn't there to back up their safety.
Taking a more global view, the International Menopause Society doesn't mince words either. In a stark consensus statement, they declare that the prescribing of compounded bioidentical hormone therapy is simply not recommended. They point to major concerns over safety, efficacy, a complete lack of rigorous regulatory oversight, and zero scientific evidence proving their purity.
Honestly, if there's one thing you take away from this explainer, let it be this. You do not need to rely on potentially harmful, customized, unregulated mixtures to get hormones that match your body's natural chemistry. Approved, scientifically tested, and tightly regulated body-identical hormonal drugs are readily available right now on the NHS. The safe, proven options already exist.
Navigating your healthcare safely means knowing exactly what you're putting into your body, down to the absolute microgram. So, when it comes to managing your hormones and protecting your long-term health, is a supposedly tailored, highly marketed approach really worth the untested risk? Thank you so much for joining me to explore this complex topic. Keep asking the tough questions and stay focused on the facts.